I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that reduces the risk and costs of cross-border transactions. As a board member, there are few better feelings than making a suggestion which adds quick material value to your organisation. I remember when one of our board members saved us $50,000 with a quick introduction to a group discount scheme for one of our key suppliers. I continue to feel grateful to this day. Alt21 can offer exactly this kind of quick win for board members. By using their foreign exchange and hedging services, you could reduce your company's costs by 90%. For a company that has just 10 million foreign exchange exposure through its revenues or cost base, that could be over 300,000 back into the business. Alt21 are so confident that they offer the best value in the market. They show you how much they make from fees in real time before and after any transaction. If you want to save your organisation money on its foreign exchange and hedging, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Neural, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Neural, the board search specialist and market leader, bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Laurence Garrett, is general partner at Highland Europe, a growth stage VC firm investing in Europe and Israel. Laurence has been making investments for over 20 years, initially at 3i, and notable successes include Spot.io, sold to NetApp, New Voice Media, sold to Vonage, Social Point, sold to Take-Two, CSR plc, an IPO on LSE, Ubinetics, Trigenix, sold to Qualcomm, Adieton, sold to Cognosy, among others. He currently serves as non-executive director on the boards of Wirepas, hyperexponential, Modulr, Featurespace Ltd and Goodlord. Laurence, a huge welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Oliver. Thank you for having me.
That is an incredible list of investments and exits. You have just exited Featurespace, which sits alongside Autonomy and Darktrace as technology success stories that the UK is indebted to the late Professor Bill Fitzgerald and the late Mike Lynch for. Clearly, you've gone through this transition from a tech prototype to an enterprise-grade solution. Curious to hear how you thought through the where to play and how to win strategy and how you added to that as a board.
I think ultimately strategic positioning of a company is an executive team's job. I think as a non-executive board member, it would be arrogant to say you can give that direction to a business. It's a leadership role that needs to be done 24/7 by the executive leadership team. For Featurespace, post the investment, the initial challenge was really productizing the thesis solution. I think I underestimated just how much of a consultancy building the product we were doing at the time of investing. And I think it actually took a good 18 months post-investment to make it a product. As you rightly say, Oliver, turning any software solution into enterprise-grade ISO, qualified solution takes time. And in the banking sector, in payments, where you're dealing with legacy systems, you're behind the firewall. This isn't the cloud that we're talking about. This is not a cloud solution. At that time, it is heavy lifting that is required. TSYS will pay and customers will pay for that as you go, but productizing it so it becomes quicker to install, the turnaround from winning customer contract to actually going live becomes speedier is a journey. And the team was superb at that. And if you look at Featurespace now, it's a cloud-based product. That cloud offering is there as the banks themselves have moved from on-prem behind the firewall, to sort of their virtual clouds, to the actual cloud that AWS and Azure and others will be providing. So that journey's been considerable. I think some of the points that Featurespace, if I go back and think about geographical expansion, nearly all when we invest, especially in the B2B, and that's about 2/3 of our investment activity is in B2B, nearly all the time they want to get to the US. And that is a challenging thing to do. The journey is tough. And I think it's through scar tissue rather than expertise that we have a playbook. You've made mistakes and you've watched companies make mistakes when they go to the US because it's a different language. America, they might speak English, but actually American is a different language. It's a different competitive environment. And in Featurespace's case, their main competition was in the US. Hiring is incredibly difficult over there. To do it right, to do it correctly. There was a debate at the board where we said, do we go to Asia, Singapore in particular, and America at the same time? Martina, I was very grateful when Martina listened and basically said, actually, we're not going to do Singapore at the same time. My recommendation was double down, put all the focus in the US because it'd be hard enough. I was delighted when David Excel, the founder, or co-founder of the business, moved to Atlanta. I think that is a really important step for any of these transitions. Having a founder go to the US, spend time there, do the first recruits is massive because you transfer the culture. You make sure connectivity back to HQ is good. And it's easy because David can pick up the phone to anyone and they all know who he is, rather than it being a new recruit from the US, even if it's a senior one. And it just means that you give yourself a flying chance of success. You know, in hyperexponential, we have Richard Gunn, who's opened up in New York, delighted. And, you know, Richard will make that a success. Condeco, which returned half of our fund to, Paul Statham, probably added 200 million of value by moving to the US and making the US of Condeco perform equally as well as Europe. Before he moved, it was always a laggard in performance. It was always more expensive to acquire a customer, a slightly higher churn, you know, never quite on target for its forecasts. He moved 6 months later. All of those metrics started to look so much better. And of course, the buyers were in the US and he was able to deal with them in the same time zone. I'm forever grateful that Paul, you know, we chatted that through for a long time and he took the advice. I think he was going to do it anyway, but ultimately took the advice and moved to the US. It's the same for New Voice Media. The pattern is the same. Once the CEO and CFO moved, the business performed and Vonage came knocking on the door to acquire the business and the acquisition happened there. So that war stories, if you like, knowledge of how to do it, I think is invaluable. And I do think, you know, Featurespace had benefit from that. The final area I'll probably mention, and it's always true in pretty much, it's still true even when we exit businesses, to be candid, is pricing is wrong. So product pricing I love the area. I think it's a fascinating area. And I'm always amazed at how little time is spent by an executive team on pricing. They normally are price acceptors. I can't really name the company, but a company that I wasn't on the board of, but I gave some advice because I kept saying, why are you pricing your product the way you are? It was priced at £10,000. I do remember that. And it was the best bit of kit for a clean room in the world, smallest way of finding out whether there was impurities in a clean room. Incredible solution and the best solution on the market. I said, why are you doing that? And he said, well, we make 80% margin. I said, that's not an answer. Why have you priced at 10,000? Well, you know, cost of sales, it's an amazing margin. Well, it is, but why? He said, well, I haven't really thought about it. I said, double your price and keep doubling it until you have a customer that really, really, really just says there's no way. And if I'm right, take me out for a curry. 2 months later, I was in a curry house. His price had moved to 120 grand, 12x.
He only got you a curry.
He only got me a curry. The worst pricing, that's me, ever. But I don't mind. That was only a 5-minute conversation. That's fine. And he's a good friend. He'll know who he is. And but this is true in all of our businesses. How do you price the solution? And it was true at Featurespace. And it wasn't until we started really digging in at profitability per customer, which was after the investment actually, that we could see there was work to be done on pricing, and the team were brilliant at figuring out that. We provided pricing experts who were in our network to help them with that.
It's really interesting. That echoes point shared by Christian Unger, who looks after all the portfolio companies for Partners Group, where he says that's one of the areas where they add most value. And it certainly resonates for me. I mean, it's one of the areas I think I've got most wrong at Newroll, where we originally took a pricing strategy where we were trying to be as cheap as possible, the Amazon mindset of don't invest in marketing, invest in pricing. And we were losing business because people saw us as too cheap. And so we've sort of gradually been increasing, and we still have low pricing for the non-profits as part of social impact. But what's so counterintuitive to me is that organizations want to pay more. There's this reassuringly expensive Ferrero Rocher mindset. But I'm really interested in how you as a board member go beyond that, because is it as simple as keep doubling your pricing till they go away, or is there a more sort of nuanced approach?
Well, that is the advice I gave to the individual. And to be fair to him, he did double it. That is actually what he went away and did. And I was taught that lesson from someone in the telco world. It wasn't me making it up. They said exactly the same in their telco experience. They doubled pricing until someone said, I can't do that. I think it is more sophisticated than that. I think being a board member, in truth, the real work takes place outside the boardroom, doesn't it? If you feel all the work takes place in the boardroom, then you're in trouble, actually. And I certainly in the 30s, when I was in my 30s, should I say, I made that error. I always thought it was in the boardroom. It took me a while to realize that actually the best way to truly influence and impact a business is to do the work outside, to meet with more of the executive team, not just, chair or CEO outside of the boardroom. And I think on pricing, when you're doing a complex product such as fraud, you do have to take a step back and work out how do you price a new technology that's coming into the market. FICO scores have been out there for many, many years and decades indeed. So there is a price that people are prepared to pay for that score. Do they believe that you're going to be significantly superior to that score? And how do you convince them about that? And what is the journey on your go-to-market to help them be convinced that they're going to see a 30% to 40% uplift in detection of fraud, and they're going to have lower false positives, which means that's just as valuable to be candid about it, because it means a transaction that previously was getting stopped from going through, and therefore the economics lost, because the likelihood is you're picking up another card and doing the transaction with another provider, is now going through and being won for the payment provider. So both sides of those equations are very valuable, and you just have to spend time working that through. But you do need some expertise. And Ash, I can point people in the right way to go, this is where you should look. But doing the work has to, I come back to, it has to be led by the executive team, or indeed a pricing expert.
So I guess it's about your ability to connect people
Correct.
with those who do know. But I imagine there must be certain patterns you see recurring. For example, one of the ones that we've often experimented with is removing the friction of cost initially. So giving people a free test to get them to experience the value. And I sometimes worry, does that then anchor their mindset around the value? But what are the most successful patterns you see organizations adopting when they are bringing a new product to a market as regulated and complex as this example is?
Yeah, I'm glad you say the last piece, because I do feel that question is so broad when you're talking about the full range of what we as humans consume as well as B2B companies consume. But in that regulated heavy lift, where sales cycles are typically 6 to 18 months, I do feel pilot is a sensible way forward. But you can't just have pilots that are open-ended. And I'm not a huge fan of stating a low price for that pilot. I feel the organizations that Featurespace are selling to, and in truth in most large enterprise sales, the enterprise can pay. So let's be clear, the ability to pay shouldn't be brought into question. I appreciate they have budgets, they've got their own P&Ls to look after, but the ability to pay is important, and they can pay. So I'm not a fan of being cheap around that if you are bringing real value to the table. I am a fan of working out what the ROI is for them, working out and actually doing that in collaboration with them, working on either dummy data or real data. If you can do the latter, much better. And if you can do it in a collaborative way with the customer, I think you'll come out with a better win-win solution between Featurespace and their customers. And I think that is important. You have to take into account there is competition. In Featurespace's case, there's the incumbents and there's the likes of Feedzai over in the US. And you have to take into account that, those competitors can mess around with pricing. But I think what Martina did and installed early on, and you viscerally feel it when you walk through Featurespace's culture. So there was a real deep culture of customer-centric, customer first. I love that culture. I think it's the right one for most businesses. Can't think of why it wouldn't be. And a real sense of do the right thing by the customer and we will succeed. And that ethos is actually probably mirrors Highland a great deal. And when we lost in the market, it was often due to tactics that we wouldn't do. And actually just means the customer's not the right fit for us. It's just not the right fit. And when we won in the market, it was because they were being collaborative, being helpful, and actually therefore far better advocates of Featurespace going forward. Far more willing to shout from the rooftops that this is the solution that's best. And I think ultimately that influenced the likes of Visa. Because guess what? Visa have got the ability to look at every single solution on the market for many years and watch who's winning. And we know they'll have looked at every other solution on the market before deciding Featurespace is the one. And that culture that Martina created, customer centricity, being transparent, being collaborative with the customer, will have been hugely beneficial to Visa when they were making their decision.
If I reverse engineer that for a board member listening, those are probably the questions they should be asking of their organization. Are you being customer centric in your thinking? Have you worked out the ROI and have you co-designed it with them?
Yeah, correct. Especially on enterprise sales. I think you have to have that collaboration. With that type of sale, Featurespace it's a tough sale.
Can we go back to the conversation on the US? Because so many of the things there you were saying were really resonating, and it's a theme that has come up in episodes 107 and 111 with John Allen in their experience in the US, which was less positive, and Nadeem Zahawi, the founder of YouGov, and his experience in the US, which was very positive. And I think you were talking there about the importance of understanding that American is not English, the importance of relocating the founder or senior members of the team, transferring that DNA and hiring locally. What else is there like that forms part of your playbook that a board member or a founder listening to this who's looking at moving to the US needs to keep top of mind?
Firstly, when you're the individual moving, you want to make sure they land well. So if they've got partners and family, you want to make sure that they're happy with the transition, because moving abroad and living abroad, it's got a lot easier than it was, say, 20 years ago. But the truth is, it's still a massive step. If you've got kids, if you've got a partner, what are they going to do? Where are they going to live? What's the environment like? How comfortable are they with that? Because if they're not happy, you're going to have an unhappy executive at work. And actually the likelihood is the executive that goes across, the founder or whoever, is going to be really working some serious hours to get it to succeed, because it's like doing another startup. So I think that's really important and underestimated by board members. They normally just go, in this case, David's going, that's great. That's it.
That's done.
That's
tick.
done. Tick. Actually, who spent time with David, really saying, how are you thinking about this? What can we do to help? Who do we know in Atlanta? In that case, it wasn't many, to be candid, but who do we know? If it was Boston, we've done that many times. New York, many times, where we've helped with sort of navigating schooling, navigating the environment.
That's interesting. Dom Joseph, the founder of Captify, talked about that in episode 74, where his board carved out time at every board meeting to just ask him about how he was as a founder, and had this dedicated session. And he said that was one of the singular most useful things that they did, and they added a lot of value.
I don't do that at a board, I'll be honest. But I come back to, I think a lot of the work is outside of the board, and a lot of the pleasure of doing the privileged role, I consider it, that we do in this world is outside of the board meeting. I think the board is, especially at Featurespace, where there are 10 board members, 7 investors, they're not all in board members. They're big boards. It's quite difficult to add value right there, right at that meeting. And it's difficult for Martina to navigate. And I think the board was superb at sort of realizing that, recognizing it, and making sure that the conversations were done outside of the board meetings sometimes on the tricky ones. But on the US, I think the other side is ideally you do have customers already. So in Featurespace's case, it had US customers already. And I think that is useful. It's an important leverage point. It helps with marketing.
We're pulling you across.
Exactly. Be pulled. Don't just push, I think is really quite important. And then taking time to really appreciate the difference in copy. By copy, I mean marketing material, the difference in what your website might need to look like, the nuances around that, and also the regulatory environment that you're playing in Featurespace, pretty straightforward, but take something like hyperexponential, which is insurance pricing software, state by state, there can be different rules. I think understanding that and taking time to plan is useful. And I actually do think planning, I was with a business today earlier who is thinking about the US, and they're doing all the right things because they're probably 18 months away from launch. And if they do it at all, right? And I like that. I love the fact that the executive team there are thinking, do I actually do that? Is it worthwhile? Because it is such a hard road.
Too many people approach their board career the same way they approach their executive career. But organizations need different things from board members. New Plus helps you bridge the two worlds, giving you expert advice to sharpen your board profile, build non-exec expertise, and access hundreds more board roles. Go to plus.newroll.com to find out more. I'm amazed by how many plow in with building an executive team on the ground and then suddenly realize the market dynamics are completely different to their home market. And then they have to sort of unwind it all and start again. And why they don't, as you say, do that planning, it strikes me as an obvious thing to do, to go and build or just get a few advisory board members who really understand the market, help you map it out up front and only then go. But it seems to me a recurring mistake I see those expanding into the US make.
I totally agree with you. I think geography expansion is always tough. I think what's interesting is if you said to a business, we're entering the German market, for example, from the UK, they'd spend quite a bit of time thinking it through. There's something about commonality of language that just gives us a false impression. There's something about the history with the US that gives us a false impression of it's being simple. I was always struck by, and this is very old data, but secondment data, and secondments that worked. UK to Japan was high. And that's because I think the person doing it really knew it was going to be alien, very, very different to them. They knew that they were going to have a cultural adjustment to be made and the language barrier that was going to be significant. They knew that and were ready to embrace it. And the one that failed the most was US, UK. It's really, that data is old. But it's a common data. And I think it's the same in business, actually. I really do.
You talked about the size of the board on Featurespace. What were the toughest conversations you had in the boardroom on that journey?
I think the toughest moment was changing of the chair. I think that was really difficult. Gordon, who was the chairman, is a terrific guy and he's carried on being an amazing board member at other organizations. And he was amazing at Featurespace. We would not have succeeded and got to where we are without Gordon. So I think you have to have a great deal of empathy and understanding around that. And he was brilliant about the need and desire to change from both the investors and other board members. So it was done in a really high-class manner, but it is a difficult moment. I spent a great deal of time ensuring that the board were aligned around this, because who do you replace Gordon with is not straightforward. And we had a new CFO coming in at the same time. And we had some amazing people on that board. You've got the likes of the ex-CEO of MasterCard in Gene Lockhart, who is terrific knowledge of the industry compared to the other board members. But coordinating that and making sure that people were aligned took quite a bit of work, actually. And then dealing with Gordon in a fair manner, and Gordon dealing with the company in a fair manner. He was a class act, and I hope to work with him again in the future. But that was a tough moment. And Martina required a little bit of, convincing's the wrong word, but just moral support to step into the role of chief exec and chair, actually. That did require a little bit of conversation and time to think. So I'd say that was the toughest moment. And it's debatable what the benefit of that action was, actually. It's always difficult because it is a sliding door moment. You go down one path. If Gordon had been with us, and you go down another path with Martina as chair. But I think it was important to make that change, actually.
So for a listener who's facing a similar situation themselves right now, what advice would you offer them in how to approach that situation?
I'd take time and have one-on-one conversations. I'd try and draw as much of the whys, the data, the logic out of the individuals as possible, and try and make sure there is real alignment, make sure there isn't a dissenting voice. You need to be at one if you're going to make a change like that.
When you say that, do you mean because sometimes you can get these knee-jerk reactions and people are all reaching the same conclusion but for different reasons, and so the problem repeats, whereas if you've really understood what the underlying issue is, it might not be the solution, or the solution you end up with will at least solve the underlying problem? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, in this situation, I think Gordon and Martina were so close that the role differences between chair and CEO were becoming blurred. And I feel, therefore, you might as well recognise that and saying, well, Martina is really the chair and CEO. You're building in an unnecessary barrier between chair and the rest of the board, or CEO and the rest of the board in this case. It's just understanding those data points and making sure Gordon had been chair for a long time, had been appointed by Martina. And I just think it was time for a shake-up. And there was no question in my mind that Martina was the CEO of the business, and same for the other board members. She was the leader. You don't want a knee-jerk reaction. You do want to take your time, and you do want to get alignment on actually the facts so that you're making a factual decision rather than emotional. But at the same time, you have to recognize we're emotional creatures, and you want to be empathetic about it, and everyone be treated fairly in those processes.
To bring the story to its conclusion, you successfully exited to Visa in what you have referred to as the hardest exit I have ever witnessed. Yeah. What lessons does that transaction offer for board members listening?
It was really hard at Featurespace because Visa is a massive organization, and decision-making there involves a lot of people. Dom Riddick and his team, the legal team at Featurespace, and the legal advisors dealt with something like 14,000 questions, written questions, during the process. I've not seen that before. That level of diligence I've not seen. And, the deal itself took 3 years in the making and really 9 months of hard work. And that's why I do view it as one of the hardest I've seen. And Visa's made acquisitions before, so it's not the first gig, and they are set up for it. It's just they're incredibly thorough about it, and maybe don't always talk. One side of the organization, when you're that size, doesn't necessarily always talk the same language as the other side of the organization, slightly nuanced. And someone at some point has to bridge and cut through that. But in general, I would say to people that are looking at the exit, I would pick your buyer. That's the first point. I'd work out who the best potential buyer is for your business, or a group of buyers, and then I'd get to know them, and I'd spend time getting to know them. You don't get sold in this market, you get bought. And I remember Martina and the team mapping out the likely buyers for Featurespace, and Visa genuinely was number one. Not the highest bidder either, to be candid, But I'm not saying there was a huge price difference. That would have been awkward, but it wasn't the highest bidder. But it was just the best company to have the ability to make the technology and the team fly further at Featurespace. And I think that's important to the investors and certainly to Martina and the team. The second point I'd have is be prepared to walk away. You have to be prepared to walk away and make that clear. And Martina was superb. And we said no to Visa a few times, just a few times. Deals off, done. And you need to be bold about that. And you need a board to be aligned about that. And it's not fun because it's pretty.
And are you sitting there in that moment thinking, please come back, please, we've got to say no, but hopefully they'll come back? Or are you sitting there thinking, we're saying no, this is not right, and maybe they never come back?
Bit of both, Oliver. I think there's a bit where you know their interest is incredibly serious and actually what you're arguing about is petty, and they need to just figure that out. And the only way you're going to get them to figure that out is to go, no. So you do think they will come back. But at the same time, we thought we had a great business. So let's be clear. If I was in Featurespace today as an investor, I'd be delighted. We thought as an independent company, we had more to go. It wasn't like we were at the end of the road. So if they didn't come back, we'd have rock and rolled forward. No doubt about it. The third, I would say, and this is separate the M&A team, your executive team, from running the core business. It's amazing how often the core business falls away. You've heard this from other people, and I know.
I've seen it. I've experienced
Oliver,
it as an investor.
Yeah. And actually, you know what? Featurespace for 9 months just hit its numbers, bang, 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 bang. It was metronomic. And I think that was a great credit to Martina because they're working all the hours God sends. But a great team, just great credit to the team because, CFO, CEO and head of legal are pretty much out of the loop for long periods of time. And CTO is periodically whilst you're doing the deal. The fourth, and I'm never sure because you're never quite sure how it works out, but never disclose your price. I was involved in a business once that sold to Apple. It's actually the wand on Apple now. So when you press it, the photos instantly improves. And it was the first time CEO. I'll be honest, we didn't have many. I was brought in by the chair to help. I became interim CFO there for a bit. And I said to the first time CEO, I was asked, should we make this an investment and raise more money? Hadn't raised a lot of money, angel money, about $500,000 being raised. Or should we sell? And I spent time and did some analysis and basically concluded you should sell. I won't bore you with the logic. I said to the CEO, don't disclose the price. He went into his first meeting with Apple and told them exactly what the price was. And I think we could have got 2 times, 3 times the price. And I think it's a big error if you're the one giving the pricing data. And of course, these are people will ask, but it's very difficult to know how much of the synergies an acquiring business will give to you as part of the acquisition, and how it's very difficult to assess how much they really need the solution and how much they desire it. And in this case, this was a sale to Apple, their ability to pay. It's just ridiculous. There's not many companies with $1 trillion on the balance sheet. So I'd never disclose your price.
So what does that mean in practice? Because if they come to you with an offer, and I guess there is a school of thought that says you can tap into the anchoring bias and you can put up a high number that is completely unreal that then sort of already ups where they're going to come in. But let's say you haven't done that, but they've come in with a number and you say no. Do you then just say no and nothing else? Come back to me with a better offer? At some point, they're going to turn around to you and say, well, what is your price? Because I've seen it done from the other way around. This, to be fair, in larger private equity transactions where I've seen sophisticated board members turn around and say, this is our price, hit it, don't chip. If you chip, you never come back. We'll never let you in again. And so there's a sort of different approach.
I think the private equity guys can do that because then they've worked out what their returns are and they've decided I'm happy with that. So hit that price and we can move on because it works for my business model because I'm an investor. In this case, what you're best saying is that won't do it. So you're going to have to materially increase that. And they'll ask what a materially increase that is. And you probably start off with, it needs to be a multiple. So don't just think 10%, it needs to be a multiple. But I also think, and it comes back to my 5th point, get great advisors. And in this case, we had Citi advising the company. They'd followed the business for 5 odd years. And we had Wilson Sonsini on the legal side, the same lawyer who did the Twitter deal with Elon Musk, and a brilliant lawyer and team. And insert them into that discussion because they do that every day of the week. And actually having an expert in there, rather than it being Martina discussing the price or rather than it being a board member, etc., that is their job. And they're masters at it. And they also can create the fear and uncertainty of missing out on a deal better than a team can, because they don't have to live totally with the relationship afterwards. So I do think getting good advisors helps around the tactics of that. At some point you do have to, once you're getting close, but honestly, the initial offer from Visa, we just flatly rejected, and not because it was a bad offer. We just really thought there was a lot more value in the business than that. I mean, you've got a business here that went into a competition led by the US government for AI and machine learning and came something like second. That's across the world. I mean, to be clear, there's something special there, right? And that's against Google, it's against Apple, it's against Visa, it's against Accenture, it's against the great and good. And the data science team comes second. That's saying something. There's some significant intellectual property in the business that, it's always hard to value.
It's interesting. You're reminding me a lot of Sir Nigel Rudd in episode 84, where he talked at various moments in his journey where the same brinkmanship on pricing was at play, and that bravery from the board was required to look down the proverbial cliff edge and be willing to risk that the thing might go away by saying no.
It's so much easier to do if you're profitable or free cash flow. I get it that there are certain situations where you're running out of money. It's difficult. When we sold Trigenics to Qualcomm, which wasn't a huge price to be candid, I remember Qualcomm shifted the price down 50% about a week before, maybe 2 weeks before the transaction. We had a great chairperson who rang up the head of Qualcomm and said, "What have you just done? You've just, excuse my French, but you just pissed off every employee that you're about to acquire. And this is one of the best web browsers in the world for mobile and user interfaces, and you're quibbling over 25 million or 30 million. What have you done?" Price went up the next day to the same price. And we had to sell there. We were running out of money. But I do think having the nerve to do that and the moments to interject, knowing where the moments are to interject, you can't have that conversation. The chair can't have that conversation 4 or 5 times. You can only do it once. So knowing when to do that is true. The other final few comments is everyone talks about competition in a process. And I get it, competition is great, but in truth, you only need one really motivated buyer. And I never lose sight of that. And I've sold many times where there is only one buyer, but they're very motivated. And I think that can be good enough. And the final comment I would probably say is be prepared to fail on the process. I mean, it's sort of a bit like say no, but also I do think companies learn a great deal. Most of the processes at Highland, most of the portfolio, when they run through their first potential exit process, doesn't succeed. And the first thing we'll do is, as partners, pick up the phone to the founders and say, "That's great. So what have we learned?" Rather than, and I think a lot of people in our industry say, "Oh, it's a disaster." I mean, that's the last thing your founder, your CEO, and your entrepreneur wants to hear. I mean, the truth is, it is great. You will have learned something from the process. It's not wasted. And you will be able to pivot or modify operations slightly to go again. This wasn't the first exit discussion that Martina had had with Featurespace.
Yeah, I think I've seen so many boards and CEOs make that mistake of failing to manage the expectations that most transactions do fall over, and that you need that Admiral Jim Stockdale from Good to Great's mindset of we will get there, we don't know when, but you just got to maintain the faith. Funny enough, I was talking to a CEO recently whose transaction has just fallen over and is really having a tough time now getting the team up to go again with the existing ownership structure, which is a really hard place to be.
And it will impact your operations as a result and your operating performance. If the team start And what do they say? Spending the money ahead of the actual exit. It's a disaster. It's another reason why you should separate the M&A group from the operations group through the process, because you don't want everyone knowing in your organization that these conversations are taking place. Ideally, you need a tight cohort of people that are going to keep it quiet for a good period of time.
Time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round. I'll ask you a quick question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Let's go.
Best book every board member should read and why?
Not necessarily for the board, but the best book I've read in the last 5 years is The End of the World is Just the Beginning. It's written by Peter Zeihan, who is an advisor to the CIA, FBI, predicted the Ukraine war in 2013, 2014. He said Russia had 10 years to invade and gave the reasons why. He is brilliant at geopolitics. He's brilliant at understanding commodity and commodity prices. And I found it really educational around population, what's happening in China, what's happening in Russia, the US, what's going on at the moment around tariffs. He had it written 3 or 4 years ago.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Yeah, that's easy. Remuneration. I can't stand my industry for the way they handle remuneration. So I think it's petty normally. I now take myself off RemCom if people offer, because I know it will not do my mental health any good. It'll just irritate me.
Most valuable board ritual?
Dinners.
Favorite quote?
The more I practice, the luckier I get. And I think it points to the need to fail, and you learn from failure, but the need to keep going and picking yourself up and trying again. And I certainly feel that in my career. You know, I've failed to acquire the businesses. When I left 3i, tried to make an acquisition with a bunch of former colleagues. We failed on that, lost to DFJ Esprit, and then tried to raise a fund with some colleagues, and that failed before going with Highland and Fergal and Tony and Sam and Irina and succeeding. And you just learn. And I think that resilience is really quite important. And I wish it helped my golf game as well, but it hasn't quite yet.
Most significant professional insight?
Nothing more than people, to be honest. It's all about people. I'm not sure that's much of an insight, but find great people, you will do something good.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
I come back to, I think the board meeting's really important, but the work around it is more important, and you need to do that.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
I had a very bad experience, which actually, I'll be candid, I needed counselling for, so it was really bad. And the judgment call was just, I misjudged my fellow board members, so it really did misjudge the people. So without going into too much detail, it was pretty bad, I got to be honest. I felt hoodwinked.
What did you learn?
I think in this industry, and you know, it's funny, the counselling probably taught me this more than anything. It will happen, Laurence. It will happen, so don't worry about it. Because I was going pretty introspective about the errors or mistakes that I had made, maybe. What had I missed? What had I got wrong? And I think, in truth, I had misjudged the people. There probably were warning signs there. It was hard to evaluate given the time frames that we were under and operating under. But don't be too harsh on yourself about that. You know, you'll never be 100% correct. If you're 80% and above, you're going to do pretty well in this job. And get back to feeling confident about that 80% being correct. And I'm fortunate enough, lucky enough, whatever, that is the case. So start believing back in myself about, you know, these things do happen. You will make errors.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
Just sheer experience. Intellectually, the grey cells are probably falling away at a horrendously rapid rate. But intellectually, I wouldn't say I'm more powerful or anything like that than I was. But there is just a depth of experience that I've seen. So it's rare that there's always something new that hits you with every company, but the naivety's gone.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Have fun. I think work is fun. You should make sure it is fun. It's got to be pleasurable. Take your time. I don't think you're ever in as much pressure or rush. You can always, time is your ally nearly always in life. And it allows you to percolate the idea and think about it and talk to others and find great people. be around great people. Surround yourself with great people. You will do well.
Laurence, thank you for sharing your experience and wisdom.
Oh, you're most kind, Oliver. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you're ready to take the guesswork out of your board career, Neurol Plus gives you expert support, tailored guidance, and a much wider pool of live board roles. Listeners get a 10% discount. Head to plus.neurol.com and apply the code ENTER at checkout.